The band was between songs when Patrick leaned over, still holding his champagne glass, and asked me a question so quietly that only I heard it. Mira, why does the catering invoice have your account number on it instead of the wedding fund? I remember exactly what I was wearing: a navy wrap dress, my grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones I only took out for things that mattered. I remember the smell of gardenias from the centerpieces, and I remember my stomach dropping straight through the dance floor. Because I knew the answer, and I knew the second I gave it, 3 years of careful silence were going to come apart in front of 200 people holding shrimp cocktail. But to understand why that question hit me like a freight train, you have to go back. Back to a Tuesday afternoon in March, 4 months before that wedding, when my mother called me during my lunch break and said the words that started all of it. Mira, honey, we just need a little help, just this once. My name is Mira Calloway. I'm 33 years old. I run a freelance bookkeeping practice out of a converted sunroom in Savannah, Georgia. And if there's one thing I'm good at, it's numbers. Not because I love them, because numbers don't lie to you. People do. Numbers just sit there, telling you the truth whether you want to hear it or not. I'd spent 9 years building that practice client by client, mostly small businesses: a dental office on Abercorn Street, a kayak rental company on Tybee Island, a contractor named Earl who paid me in cash and sweet tea. By that March, I had 41 regular clients and, more importantly to me, $42,300 sitting in a Wells Fargo savings account earmarked for a down payment on a little brick bungalow off Bull Street I'd been driving past for 2 years like it owed me money. My younger sister, Devon, was 27, beautiful in the effortless way that made strangers stop her in grocery stores, and engaged to a man named Patrick Hale, a forensic auditor for an insurance firm in Atlanta. Patrick was careful, precise, the kind of man who balanced his own checkbook by hand, even though the bank app did it for him. I liked him immediately. I think some small part of me liked him because he reminded me of myself. So when my mother called that Tuesday and said they were $8,500 short on the venue deposit for Devon's wedding, a converted rice barn on the Isle of Hope, with a view of the marsh that Devon had wanted since she was 19, I didn't even hesitate. I transferred it that night. Wire confirmation, 6:47 p.m., account ending in 4412. It's a loan, my mother said. We'll pay you back once your father's bonus comes through. I believed her. That's the part I still have trouble admitting out loud. I believed her, the same way I'd believed her at 22 when I covered the security deposit on their townhouse, and at 26 when I quietly paid off my father's truck so the bank wouldn't repossess it before Christmas. I'd been the family's emergency fund for over a decade, and somewhere along the way, emergency had stopped, meaning emergency. 3 weeks later, my mother called again. The florist needed a deposit. Then it was the photographer. Then alterations on Devon's dress, a sample gown from a boutique in Charleston that cost more than my first car. Each time, the number got a little bigger. Each time, I told myself it was the last time. By the end of May, I'd sent $63,000. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't angry yet, not really. I told myself this was what family did, that Devon's wedding mattered, that my parents were stretched thin, that I had the savings and they didn't, and what kind of person sits on a down payment fund while her sister's dream wedding falls apart for lack of $8,500. That was the story I told myself. Right up until the night I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, reconciling my own accounts the way I reconciled everyone else's, and noticed something that didn't add up. The florist invoice my mother had forwarded me, the one I'd paid in full, was dated 2 days before my mother had even called me asking for the money. I sat there for a long time, just looking at that date. Numbers don't lie, but people forward you the wrong invoice when they're moving fast and don't expect anyone to check the math. I closed the laptop. I didn't say anything to my mother. I didn't say anything to Devon. I opened a new folder on my desktop instead, and I named it Wedding Records. I had no idea yet how full that folder was going to get. The folder started small: a screenshot of the florist invoice with the wrong date, a bank confirmation number, a text from my mother that just said, "Thank you, Angel, you're saving us," with no mention of paying anything back. But folders like that don't stay small, not once you start looking. The first real crack came on a Sunday morning in June. I was at my parents' house in Pooler, helping Devon steam her veil in the kitchen while my mother ran errands, when Devon's phone buzzed on the counter and lit up with a notification from Chase. Payment received. $2,400. Account ending 7731. I wasn't trying to snoop. I was standing 3 feet away holding a steamer. But I do numbers for a living, and a number that big jumps out at you whether you want it to or not. That's a lot for a wedding deposit, I said, half joking. Devon barely looked up from the veil. Oh, that's not wedding stuff. That's just Mom's helping me with something else. She didn't elaborate. I didn't push. But that night, I sat down and pulled up every transfer I'd made since March, 14 of them, totaling $63,000, and I lined them up against the actual wedding vendor contracts my mother had shared with me in a folder called Devon's Big Day. 3 of the contracts didn't match the amounts I'd sent, not by a little, by thousands. I called the florist directly the next morning, using the excuse that I was confirming delivery details for the reception. Her deposit, she told me, had been $1,800. I had sent $4,300. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Publix on Abercorn Street for 11 minutes before I could make myself drive home. That was the moment I knew something was very wrong. Not, my parents are bad with money wrong. Something deliberate. I didn't confront anyone. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't grace, and it wasn't patience. It was strategy. I'd watched my mother talk her way out of overdraft fees, parking tickets, and one memorable confrontation with our old landlord. And I knew that if I came at her with suspicion and no proof, she'd have an explanation ready before I finished the sentence. I needed proof first. I needed the whole picture. So I became very quiet and very busy. I requested PDF statements, going back to January from my own Wells Fargo account, and cross-referenced every transfer against a spreadsheet I built with columns for date, amount, stated purpose, and actual vendor cost where I could verify it. I started saving every text message to a separate archive, not deleting, not even responding sometimes, just documenting. I stayed quiet. I let them talk. It was my grandfather's old doorbell camera that gave me the next piece, completely by accident. Granddad Eli had passed 2 years earlier and left his house to my mother, who still hadn't sold it. And the smart camera on the porch was still connected to an app on my phone because nobody had ever bothered transferring the account. In late June, the camera pinged my phone at 9:14 p.m. Motion detected, and out of habit, I opened it. It was my mother getting out of her car in the driveway of a house that hadn't been hers for 2 years, holding what looked like a thick envelope. She wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize, mid-50s, stood waiting by the door. I watched the clip 3 times. Then I added it to the folder. I told myself it was probably nothing. A neighbor. A contractor. Something about Granddad's estate. I was wrong about almost all of it. And 2 weeks later, I'd find out exactly how wrong, sitting across from a casino statement with my sister's name on it. The casino statement came from the strangest possible source. My own credit monitoring app. I'd signed up for Experian alerts years ago, back when a client of mine got his identity stolen, and I'd watched what it did to his life. I barely thought about the app anymore. It just sat on my phone, quiet, until the first week of July, when it wasn't quiet at all. New inquiry detected. SunTrust personal loan application. Amount requested, $15,000. I stared at that notification on my kitchen counter for a full minute before I understood what I was looking at. I hadn't applied for a loan. I hadn't even thought about a loan. I called SunTrust the next morning at 9:02 a.m., sitting in my sunroom office with my second cup of coffee going cold beside the laptop. The representative, a man named Carl, was kind but careful, the way people get when they sense something's wrong before you've even said it. He told me the application had been submitted online 3 weeks earlier, using my social security number, my date of birth, and an old address I hadn't lived at in 6 years. The apartment on Habersham Street I'd moved out of when I was 25. Was it approved? I asked. Approved and funded, Carl said. Disbursed to an account ending in 0093 on June 19th. Account 0093 wasn't mine. I knew that immediately because I know all of mine by heart. I asked Carl if he could tell me whose name was on it. He couldn't. Privacy rules. But he didn't have to, not really. Because that same afternoon, I finally cracked open the casino statement that had been sitting in my folder since the doorbell camera clip. A statement I'd requested weeks earlier from a self exclusion support line after noticing Devin's name on a Players Club email that had accidentally gone to our shared family group chat. Devin had a balance with the Bluffton Casino across the South Carolina line of $19,400. Markers, they call them. Casino I owe us, basically, with interest that made my stomach turn. The $15,000 loan, taken out in my name, had landed in an account that fed directly into paying down that marker. I sat at my kitchen table that night until almost midnight, laying it all out like a balance sheet because that's the only language that made any of it make sense to me. 63,000 in wedding transfers, at least 11,000 of which never reached an actual vendor. A $15,000 loan opened in my name without my knowledge. A doorbell clip of my mother handing an envelope to a stranger outside a dead man's house. I thought about calling my mother right then. I wanted to. My hands were actually shaking. Instead, I opened my laptop and typed 4 words into the search bar: identity theft, family member attorney. That was the moment I knew this had stopped being about a wedding. I wasn't going to be passive about it. I was going to be careful and exact and unshakable, the way I am with every number that's ever crossed my desk. I wasn't going to cry about this. I was going to build a case. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't find out until I sat across from a sharp, no nonsense attorney named Renee Fairweather 2 days later, was that this wasn't the first time my name had quietly funded something I knew nothing about. It went back further than a loan. It went back to a trust my grandfather had set up for me before he died. And somebody in my family had been moving money out of it for years. Renee Fairweather's office was on the third floor of a converted cotton warehouse on Bay Street, all exposed brick and tall windows looking out over the river. And within the first 10 minutes of our meeting, I understood exactly why 3 different people had told me she never loses. She didn't react to anything I said. She just took notes in small, precise handwriting and asked questions that made me realize how much I still hadn't put together. Walk me through the trust, she said, after I'd laid out the wedding transfers, the SunTrust loan, the casino marker. I told her what I knew, which wasn't much. My grandfather, Eli Calloway, had died 2 years earlier and left a trust. I'd always understood it was modest, maybe $10,000 or $15,000, meant to help with whatever Mira needs when she needs it, as he used to say. My mother had been named trustee since I was technically still finishing my accounting certification when the trust was drawn up, and Granddad wanted someone responsible managing it until I was settled. Renee asked for the trust documents. I didn't have them. I'd never asked for them because I'd never had a reason to. It took her firm 11 days to get a copy from the county probate court. When she called me into her office to go over it, she'd already highlighted half the page in yellow. The trust hadn't held $15,000. It had held $74,000, proceeds from Granddad's life insurance policy, which he'd specifically designated for me, for the purchase of a home or such other purpose as may benefit Mira's long-term security. Over the 2 years since his death, $58,000 of it had been withdrawn in 11 separate transactions, each one authorized by my mother as trustee. 2 of those withdrawals, $9,000 in March and $6,500 in May, landed the exact same week I'd been told the venue and the florist needed deposits. My mother hadn't been short on money for Devin's wedding. She'd been paying for it with money my dead grandfather left specifically for me, and then calling me to ask for more on top of it. I didn't cry in that office. I want to be honest. I wanted to. But Renee looked at me across that desk, set down her pen, and said something I've thought about almost every day since. You can be devastated later. Right now, you need to decide what kind of fight you want to have. I told her I didn't want to blow up my sister's wedding. Devin hadn't asked for any of this. As far as I could tell, she didn't even know about the trust, and she may not have fully understood where the gambling money came from either. I wasn't protecting my parents. I was protecting the one person in this who might actually be innocent. Renee didn't love that plan, but she respected it. We built a strategy instead. File a police report for the unauthorized loan immediately, since identity theft has a clock on it. Send my mother a formal demand letter regarding the trust quietly through Renee's office with a 30-day deadline. Not loud, not public, just unmistakably real. And wait, let the wedding happen. Let everyone have their day. What neither of us planned for was Patrick. 2 weeks before the wedding, in his role overseeing the joint wedding account he and Devin had opened together, Patrick ran his own quiet reconciliation, because that's what forensic auditors do, even with their own money. He found the same gaps I had. He just didn't know yet that I already had a folder with all the answers. He came to me 4 days before the wedding, in the parking lot of his own engagement party rehearsal, and asked if we could talk privately. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to find out I wasn't the only person in that family who refused to let numbers lie quietly. Patrick didn't yell. That surprised me looking back, given everything, given who he was about to marry into. He just stood there in that parking lot under a string of half-lit market lights and said, "I think your family's been lying to me about where the wedding money came from. I think they might be lying to you too. Am I close?" I told him everything, all of it. The trust, the loan, the casino marker, 18 months that I'd compressed into 4 months of a folder named Wedding Records. He listened the way auditors listen, without interrupting, occasionally asking me to repeat a figure so he could write it down correctly. When I finished, he said one thing that stuck with me. "Devin doesn't know about the trust. I'd bet my license on it, but she needs to." We agreed not to do anything before the wedding. Renee had already sent the formal demand letter to my mother 2 days earlier, 30 days, to either repay the trust or face a civil claim. My mother hadn't responded. She also hadn't said a word to me about it, which told me everything I needed to know about whether she planned to. So the wedding happened. The marsh was gold in the late afternoon light. Devin looked exactly the way she'd dreamed about since she was 19, and I stood up there as maid of honor and meant every word of my toast because none of this was Devin's fault, and I refused to let it become about her. It was at the reception, glass in hand, that Patrick leaned over and asked me the question that opened this whole story. "Mira, why does the catering invoice have your account number on it instead of the wedding fund?" I looked at him for a second. Then I looked at my mother, 3 tables away, laughing at something my father said, completely unaware that the floor was about to drop. "Because for the last 4 months," I said quietly, "I've been the wedding fund. And before that, I was the trust your mother-in-law was supposed to be protecting for me." I didn't make a scene. I'd promised myself I wouldn't, and Renee had been clear that the worst thing I could do now was let emotion outrun the paper trail. Patrick simply nodded once, set down his glass, and excused himself to find Devin. What happened over the following weeks happened quietly, the way Renee had built it to happen. My mother was served with a civil complaint for breach of fiduciary duty regarding the trust 11 days after the wedding. The police report on the fraudulent SunTrust loan led to a fraud investigator confirming what I already knew. The application had used my information, submitted from a device registered to my mother's email. Restitution was negotiated rather than litigated to a verdict. Full repayment of the $74,000 trust balance, plus the $15,000 loan, structured over 18 months, attached to a lien on my parents' home rather than risk a judge deciding the number for them. My mother tried, through her own attorney, to offer a partial settlement early on, quietly, almost apologetically. Renee's answer was the same, 4 words every time. "We'll see you in court." Devin called me 3 weeks after the wedding, after she and Patrick had gone through the full trust paperwork together. She didn't excuse what our parents did. She just cried and apologized for things that weren't actually hers to apologize for, and asked if I'd help her set up her own accounts, separate from our parents, for the first time in her life. I closed on the little brick bungalow off Bull Street 4 months later. Devin helped me paint the kitchen. We didn't talk about the wedding money that day. We didn't need to. I think about Granddad Eli sometimes, sitting on his porch under that camera and nobody ever disconnected. And I wonder if some part of him knew exactly what he was protecting me from when he wrote such other purpose as may benefit Mira's long term security into that trust. I stayed quiet for a long time, but quiet was never the same thing as passive. I was building the whole time. And in the end, the numbers told the truth, the way they always do.